of Cares. We are here to break down the complexity of nation legal system into a clear, practical, and engaging discussion. So, I'm your host for today. I'm Christina, and today we are going to explore one of the most fundamental concepts in a civil litigation, which is burden of proof under the Evidence Act 1950. So, let me begin by setting up a little bit of a scenario. So, today, for today's discussion, so we have a dispute between Amina and Bella, and Amina was filed a civil suit against Bella. So alleging that she breached a contract for sales and good. To support her claim, Amina produced a signed agreement which appears to be a strong and direct evidence of the contract between Amina and Bella. So, however, Bella does not sign the agreement. Instead, she's raised a defense which introduced a new layer of complexity. So she claims that she has included into entering the contract because Amina made a false representation. So about the quality of the good. So in other words, Bella is arguing that the contract is not straightforward as it is, and it's appeared because it's formed based on misleading foundations. So informations, I mean. So here's the key issue that we will addressing today is that this who bear the burden of proof, this case, and how does the burden shift during the trial, and this crucial question because in a law, it is not enough to simply make an allegation. So the court requires a proof and the responsibility to provide the proof of lies on the specific party at the specific stages of the proceedings. To guide us for today's discussion, I'm joined by our panel today. So we have Mr. Faik, our legal expert, and we have Mr. Alex, who will analyze Amina's position, and we have Mr. Umar, who will present Bella's perspective, and finally we have Mr. Amin, who will help us to understand and how the court will ultimately decide this matter. So, Mr. Faik, can we start with you first? Okay. So, can you explain to us the burden of proof under the Evidence Act 1950, and in a way that is clear and easy for our viewer to understand?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Christina. So basically, the concept of burden of proof is absolutely central to understanding how any case is decided in the court. So under the Evidence Act 1950, there are three key provisions that we must focus on, which are Section 101, 102, and 103. So let me begin with Section 101, which establishes what we call the legal burden. This section provides that whoever desires the court to give judgment to any legal right or liability that depends on the existence of certain facts must prove those facts. In simple terms, this means that the party who brings the case to the court, they must prove the foundation of their claim. For example, that I can give, if Amina claiming that Bala breached a contract, first she must prove that a valid contract exists between both of them. Then she must also show that Bala failed to perform his obligations under that contract. This burden remains on Amina herself throughout the case and does not shift. Okay, next we move to the Section 102, which introduces the concept of the evidentiary burden. So unlike the legal burden, which I just explained on the Section 101, the burden in this section is not fixed. It shifts between the parties depending on the state of the evidence at any given time. The section states that the burden lies on the person who would fail if no evidence were given on either side. This means that once one party produces sufficient evidence to support their claim to the court, the burden automatically moves to the other party to respond to their claim. And finally, for Section 103, with particular facts. This section states that when a party asserts a specific fact, the burden of proving that fact lies on the party alone. So, in this case, Bala is asserting that he was induced into the contract by misrepresentation. Therefore, it is his responsibility to prove that Amina made a false statement and that he relied on that statement alone when entering the agreement with Amina. So basically, when we combine these three sections, we can clearly see how the burden of proof operates in these stages. So Amina must first establish her case, after which the burden shifts to Bala to prove his defense.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick, for that explanation. It's really helped to set our foundation for the discussion for today. So now I would like to clarify one important point. When Bala misrepresentations, what is the standard of proof that must really he is satisfied with?
That is an excellent question, Ms. Christina. So basically, in civil cases, even when serious allegations such as fraud or misrepresentation are involved, the standard of proof remains the balance of probabilities. This means that the court will decide the case based on which version of events is more likely to be true. So this principle was clearly affirmed in the case of Lecumi Chettiar Alagapan versus Secure Plantation Sendirian Berhad. Have you guys heard about the case?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically, this case is very interesting because there was a dispute involving the power of attorney that was alleged to be fraud. So, in this case, the lower courts had applied an incorrect standard of proof, but the federal court clarified later that even for allegations of forgery, the correct standard in civil proceedings is the balance of probabilities. And then, the court emphasized that while allegations such as fraud are very serious, they do not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt in civil cases. Instead, the party making the allegation must first show that it is more likely than not that the allegation is true. So, by applying all of this into our scenario, Bala does not need to prove misrepresentation to a criminal standard. However, he must still provide sufficient evidence to convince the court that his versions of events is more probable than Amina's herself.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick, for that clarification. So now let's we move on application and of this principle. So we will have Mr. Alex. So from Amina's perspective, how strong is the case's claim? Can you share with us?
In my view, Amina's case is quite strong, especially at the beginning of the trial. Under Section 101, she has the legal burden to prove that a contract exists, and she has done exactly that by producing a signed agreement. What makes her position even stronger is that Bala admits he signed the agreement. That removes any argument about whether the contract was properly formed. At that point, the court can confidently say that there is a valid contract on its face. That can better be understood if we look at the case of Alliance Bank Malaysia, Berhad versus Sa'il bin Yalang. In that case, the bank provided 2 overdraft facilities and claimed that the defendant had guaranteed both. The defendant admitted to signing only one guarantee, but denied signing the second one. The court examined the evidence carefully and held that the burden was on the bank to prove that the defendant had signed the second guarantee. The bank failed to produce sufficient evidence, such as a witness to confirm the signing or a clear proof of execution. Because of that, the court refused to hold the defendant liable for the second facility. Now, when we apply that to Amina's case, she is actually in a stronger position because Bala himself admits to signing the agreement. There is no dispute about the execution at all. So she has clearly discharged her burden under Section 101. At this stage, she has established a prima facie. If the court stops the trial here, she would succeed. So naturally, under Section 102, the burden shifts to Bala. Honestly, from my perspective, Bala now has a difficult task. He's trying to challenge a contract that appears valid and properly executed.
But Alex, do you think you are relying too heavily on the signature alone?
I wouldn't say too heavily, but I do think that it is very strong evidence. In commercial dealings, a signature represents agreement and intention. If we allow people to escape contracts they sign easily, it would create uncertainty.
I'm agree with that. But we also can't ignore how the contract was formed, yeah? So that's where Bala's argument comes in.
This question is already getting interesting and heat up. So, Mr. Umar, let's hear from you, like your fully respond about this discussion, like this topic.
I agree with that. That Amina established a strong starting point, but I think Alex is treating the signature as if it automatically decides the case, and that is not entirely accurate. We are looking at the law at whether the agreement was entered into honestly. I can say under section 103, Bala is making a specific allegation which is misrepresentation, and also so now the burden is on him to prove that Amina made a false statement. And about this, the good thing is we can influence his decision. So now let me explain using the case of the very famous case of ALW Car Workshop Sdn Berhad versus AXA Afin General Insurance Berhad. So looking in this case, a workshop made an insurance claim about regarding 1.7 million after a fire destroyed their premises. Later, during the case, they reduced the claim drastically to around 237k. So, Christina, the insurer argued the original claim was exaggerate and therefore fraudulent. So, looking at the court, the federal court looked closely at the evidence and found that the workshop has a claim for vehicles, and there was not actually customers' cars. Some were scrap vehicles and some were not even damaged. So this actually showed that the claim was not just a mistaken but involved dishonestly. So looking at the court held fraud must be assessed at the same time the claim was first made. So the workshop could not record this dishonestly, and later by reducing the claim, and because of the initial dishonesty, the entire claim was rejected. So the key principle here is that dishonestly at the beginning can affect the entire transaction. So now I like to apply it to Bala's situation. If he can prove that Amina made false statements about the quality of the goods from the start, and then the contract must be considered is defective.
Umar, that depends on Bala actually proving it, right?
Exactly, Mr. Alex, and I fully agree with that. The burden is on Bala now, but my point is, we cannot dismiss his defense just because there is a signature. He also produced convincing evidence the situation could change completely.
That's true, but until he proves it, the contract stands.
Yeah, I can say yes, exactly, but that is precisely when the burden of proof becomes so important.
Negative to answer, right? So now we're going to realize, Mr. Ami. So based on all this agreement between Suma and Mr. Alex, so how will the court resolve this issue? Usually, how it's being resolved? Can you explain it to us?
Thank you. For resolving this issue, the court must apply the structural framework provided by Evidence Act 1950. So first, under Section 101, Amina bear the legal burdens of providing the existence of the contract. She has successfully discharged this burden by producing a signed agreement, and this is further supported by Bala admission that he has signed the document. Second, under Section 102, once Amina has established a prima facie case, the evidentiary burden shifts to Bala. At this stage, Bala must present evidence to support his defense. For the third, under Section 103, Bala must prove the specific allegation of misrepresentation. This include provide that Amina has made a false statement, that he is rely on the statement when entering into the contract. So, as we have the labeling case, so which is bad, as Alliance Bank has demonstrated that the burden of proving execution lie on the party assisting it, and in this case, that burden has been satisfied. The case of Lechman and Chetia confirmed that the standard of proof is the balance of probability. The case of ALW case car workshop emphasized that allegation of fraud must be supported by clear evidence and cannot be based on mere assertion. So in this present scenario, Bala has made claim of misrepresentation without providing any supporting evidence. As a result, he has failed to discharge his burden of proof. Therefore, the court will conclude that Amina has successfully proven her case, while Bala has failed to establish his defense. So the judgment will enter in favor of Aminah.
Thank you, Sami, for your insightful explanation about the court. So, before we begin to jump to our conclusion, how about we start with our Q&A first. So, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Faiz first. So, Mr. Faiz, why Section 101 considered so important in civil cases?
That's an interesting question, Ms. Christina. So, to answer that question, because Section 101 determines who must start proving the case first. So, without this rule, the court will not know which party has the responsibility to provide the evidence first.
Based on what you say, can the burden of proof change during the trial? So, like, will they any like changes of the burden, stuff like that? Can you explain it?
Yes, the legal burden usually remains on the plaintiff, but the evidentiary burden can shift between parties depending on the evidence produced during the trial of the court. Okay, I have a question for you, Mr. Alex. So my question is, why was Aminah signed agreement considered strong evidence? What do you think about it?
That's a good question. Because the agreement clearly showed that the contract existed, and Bala himself admitted to signing it, that helped Aminah establish a prima facie case under Section 101.
Okay, I have another question for you. How does the Alliance Bank case support Aminah's argument? Do you have an answer for that?
Yes, I do. The case shows that the party relying on a document must prove proper execution. In Aminah's case, that burden was satisfied because Bala admitted to signing. Now, Mr. Umar, I have a question. Why can't Bala rely only on allegations of misrepresentation?
So it's a great question, Mr. Alex, because under Section 103, the person making a specific allegation must prove it with evidence. Mere accusations are not enough in court.
What lesson can we learn from the ALW car workshop case?
So once again, it's a great question too. The case actually teaches us that dishonesty or fraud must be supported by clear evidence, and false misrepresentation can affect the validity of the entire transaction. I think that's all. So Amir, so what would happen if Bala successfully proved misrepresentation?
So, great question. So if Bala successfully proven that Aminah made a false statement, which influenced him to enter the contract may be considered effective.
So Amir, why did the court finally decide in favor of Aminah?
That's because of Aminah successfully proven the existence of the contract, which Bala failed to provide sufficient evidence to support his defense of misrepresentation. So, Mr. Sina, what do you get from our discussion?
So, for today's takeaways are that the court decided things like based on the evidence and not just allegation. Am I right? So, and the burden of the proof that determine which party must prove a certain fact. So that's what I get from today's discussion. So that's. So that brings us to the end for today's discussion. So what can we learn from this case in this burden of proof operates in structure and logical manners? So the plaintiff must first establish their claims, and after which the burden may shift to the defendants. So any specific offence must be supported by the evidence. Most importantly, the court does not decide case based on the allegation alone. It's required proof, and the party that failed to provide the proof will ultimately lose the case. So sadly, we already wrap up our session for today, and I would like to thank all our panelists today for their insightful contribution. You're coming. And thank you also for our viewers for listening and joining our podcast today. And stay tuned for our next episode. Bye.
Bye.